This week on LCARA Ham Radio, we're going to take the wiring that we've newly installed on the EmComm Jr trailer and we're going to begin hooking it up to the lights. And a few skills are going to be learned along the way. Butt splices may be used. That's what's coming up next this week on LCARA Ham Radio. Well, anytime you're going to be working on a wiring project, you want to make sure you're going to have all of the materials and tools that you're going to need. And as you look at this still, we've got electrical tape, we've got butt splices, we've got wire strippers, we've got snips, we've got crimpers, and we've also got some nylon ties. And if you look underneath, there's also going to be some heat shrink with adhesive. So here's the trailer. We've got the wiring mostly installed, but it's not actually hooked up now to the actual lights. We've got the rear tail lights that will have markers as well as blinkers and brake lights. And then we also have forward marker lights, the amber lights, which actually on a trailer of this length you probably don't need, but the kit included them. So we're going to go ahead and make sure those are connected as well. So AC4DM puts down the cardboard on the gravel so that as we get down on the ground, it won't actually bite into your body. Now, one of the first things that AC4DM wanted to make sure is that we had a good ground connection coming from the trailer, from say the truck to the trailer, and he's showing us about where we need to drill a hole so that that common ground coming from actually the trailer hitch there and the ball on the truck will be a good connection. So AC4DM goes to work because we're actually going to need some of these butt splices a little bit later, and he just churns these things out. It doesn't take him long to pull off all that plastic because ultimately the plastic just gets in the way. So we needed about 6 or 8 of those. Next we get to drilling on the trailer where we're going to be hooking up that white wire with a nice new eyelet on it. So we start with a small bit and we work our way up. Bit number 1, bit number 3 here, and then we chamfer it so that we have some actual metal there peeking up as we bolt that down and get a good ground. And we actually chamfered that on both sides. Now AC4DM goes to work in his little parts drawer there, making sure that we have the right bolt and that we have the right washer, or eyelet in this case, that we're going to put on the end of that white wire. Right now it's just bare wire. We need to strip it and then install the eyelet. Strippers come out, and what's really interesting is when AC4DM gets on a roll, he just goes from tool to tool to tool and he just knocks it out. It just doesn't take him any time at all. Insert a little bit of bare copper into the eyelet. The right sized eyelet, by the way, for the type of bolt that we're going to use. And then he's going to show where it's going to go. Next, he's going to take some of that electrical tape that we saw a little bit earlier in our supplies, and he's going to wrap up those wires so that they're not just dangling. And this will also provide some strain relief as well from the wires themselves to the connector. And I'd say he's done this a few thousand times in his automotive career. Now here was a little trick I had never seen before. He has this nice little tail, and then what he does is he basically curls it up to give him kind of like a little wire, and then he just ties it in. He builds a little loop and ties it down so that part of the tape won't actually come loose. And then again, test fitting that white wire. Now we've got our bolt, nut, and washer, and we're going to go ahead and put those pieces together, tighten it down, and we should have a pretty good ground coming from this end of the hitch going to the truck that ultimately is going to be pulling this trailer. And a ground is going to come in a little bit later as well when we get to actually testing out the lights. I wonder if any of you can figure out where our next ground will actually be. Nice and tight. And now you can see the end result. We've got that wire nice and anchored, and we've got it taped up. It's just a 4-pin connector because we don't have hydraulic or electric brakes. Now we move on to the actual connections to the lights themselves. Again, we ran this wiring in the last video under the bottom so that it wouldn't get chafed, and we used some fuel line, I think it was, as a way to protect the wires. It went through a couple of washers underneath. You can't see them here, that were welded to the frame to thread your wiring through so it doesn't actually hang down. So what AC4DM is doing now is, again, he stripped his wire just a little bit more to get a little bit more metal there, and then he's going to test fit a butt splice that he's going to use for these two pieces. So you can see we've got a piece coming off the light. The piece he was just working with there on the ground now. Trimming off a little bit of that copper wire, some of it that got buggered up a little bit. And now we're going to take that butt splice that you saw him removing the plastic protective coating on. He doesn't like that protective plastic because it doesn't actually allow you to get a really good crimp. And as we'll see, it doesn't have any protection on it now, so we're going to have to add some. So he's got one end in and the second end right there. And that will give you an idea of what we're going to do several times as we go around the trailer in connecting the new wiring to the lights. Our trusty heat gun. We've used this back in the garage, so we pulled this out to the big barn where the trailer is. He's got power out there, of course, and we've got it all hooked up. Now you can see some of that heat shrink and what he's going to do. Now this is heat shrink that has adhesive on the inside so that when you actually shrink it down, it also provides some protection against water intrusion. We don't want these connections to get corroded or get water in there. So again, we're just test fitting the butt splice here as to how we're going to crimp it. And you can see then he pushed up that little bit of heat shrink, and that's what it's going to look like when it's done. And we'll show you that in just a moment. Now all that's left is to actually do the crimp for this first wire. And you'll notice we've got a second one there yet to do. Those of you that have been around the channel for a while, you've seen those crimps before. Those are Klein crimps, and of course are not terribly cheap. He's only got 2 or 3 of those laying around the shop. And out comes the heat gun. So you can see he slid the adhesive-based heat shrink up over that butt splice and evenly. And when this gets heated up, it will shrink down. And he ensures that as he applies heat from various directions, a little bit of that glue starts to come out of both ends. And that way you know he probably have a pretty good shrink. And this should help prevent water from getting in and messing up our lights. Now we're underneath the trailer that we've got both of those done. So we've actually done both wires in this case. He's wrapping it up like we did up front, and then he's going to twist up that little bit of tape and then tie it down. Again, this is under the trailer on the cardboard mats, so we didn't have a lift to put the trailer on. So we're just getting under the trailer. There's about 18 inches, I would imagine, of height, so that we can get under there and work. And remember, Don here, AC4DM, he's not a spring chicken, but man, this guy works harder than anybody I know. Alrighty, so nylon ties are going to go ahead. We've got an extra loop of wire there in case we ever have to revisit the wiring, or maybe it got knocked loose or something like that. We have extra wiring here that we can still repair the wiring going to the lights if that ever should arise. Alrighty, so now those ties are on. We'll snip off those excess ends. And the back tail light, the right side, passenger side, is finished. This is what it looks like. So you can see the ground coming from the light going to the trailer, and then we've got the wrapped up wires coming off that light going underneath, and as we saw, tied in. Now this is where one of our other members that came to our impromptu workday got to practice some of his skills. He's done this sort of thing as well, And we always ensure, Don always ensures, that not only does he show us how something can be done, but gives us an opportunity to learn it as well. And you learn by doing. So Carrie here is going to make it happen, and we're just cutting some heat shrink there, and then he's also test fitting that and making sure that he's got some. You notice we got that long length of wire there coiled up next to his leg, and if we'd been thinking, we probably would have cut some of that excess off, but ultimately we can tie that up under the trailer, not a problem, as we'll see in a little bit. Carrie gets a chance to use those famous crimps. Looks pretty tight. Then he can pull down his heat shrink. Don's telling him, hey, just try to pull them apart. There we go. Pull down that heat shrink, and then we'll heat that up to protect that butt splice. I'm always amazed, and we've mentioned this also in other videos, how much, the tools, the heat shrink, the nuts, bolts, washers, the butt splices, AC4DM has all of this. He just has inventories of this stuff so that if a project comes up, he usually doesn't have to run off to the store. So here's Carrie. He's making sure that we get all of that wire tied up underneath. And again, we'll have plenty of extra on that side of the trailer in case we ever have to revisit the wiring in the future. Now you can see that marker light just above him there in the top left. These marker lights, again, probably weren't necessary, but they came with the kit. So we wanted to ensure we installed those, and we had to actually go in and splice in a single wire to make sure that the marker lights would come on when the tail lights would come on. So AC4DM is using another butt splice, another piece of heat shrink, and then we'll see that heat gun come out yet again. All in all, 6 or 8 butt splices, the small ones for the single wires, and then back here where Don's working now, we actually had to splice in, and 3 wires came together, and that required a slightly larger butt splice, and of course he had that in his inventory as well, in his little parts piece there. So he's actually cutting the wire, so now he's got 2 ends plus the single wire that's going to supply power, and all 3 of those are ultimately going to go into a butt splice. Stripping the wires to get to the copper. In comes the butt splice, and then those crimpers. And we did this, of course, on the other side as well. With me on the camera, Carrie and Ben, KK4JPX, and myself on the camera to get a lot of this footage. We knocked this out in about 2 hours, and it's just a little bit fiddly getting underneath the trailer and everything, but once it's done very well. Attention to detail is something that our club president tries to teach us. Just a joy to watch on all of these projects. Years and years of experience being taught to other club members. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this video we had another ground, and that's from the actual trailer frame to the part of the chassis that connects to the hitch, and our lights weren't coming on as bright and weren't working correctly because we didn't have a good ground. This trailer tilts, and where the hinges are, we don't get a good ground, so we wanted to make sure that we installed a secondary ground here, or made it better. So Don's going to put an eyelet here on that bare wire, and then this actually grounds it from the tilt part of the trailer to the actual hitch, and that way we'll get a good ground all the way back. This allowed our lights to come on and work effectively. We noticed they were a little dim, and once this was installed, they were much, much brighter. And that'll pretty much close it up for this week's video. Working on the EmComm Jr trailer, we've still got to install fenders on this trailer and then put the original hardware back on after we recondition it for the hoops. It allows us to put a tarp on it, and it'll pretty much kind of look like a miniature Conestoga wagon. And there's that bright orange light. And here's Don checking that ground is good, and you can see the lights on. We've got our side light and our tail light. Harder to see on this side because of the sun, but side light and rear tail light, and then once again the marker light on the other side. Thanks for watching, 73, and we hope to see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.